You know, it matters because I truly feel like Sean would be saying to me, Mom, you need to help other people. You're not the only person this has happened to. Can you get out in front of this and be a voice? Because this is not okay, how people have been taken advantage of, and they have. Larry is not an honest person. He has lied, from Maureen Faulkner with her whole situation to all of these moms that have kids that have been killed in the streets of Philadelphia. He's lying. People have learned of plea deals on the news about their kids. Like, how unacceptable is that? And usually something much less than, of course, the parents thought. Now, look, I get that there's two sides to every story. But what he's doing in the city of Philadelphia is unacceptable. That's the why for me right now. And I believe it's going to create anarchy. You know, so he's come out and said, we don't prosecute retail theft. I had a friend call me the other night. He lives in North Philadelphia. And he says, you know, I'm at my normal Wawa in North Philly. He says, kids are walking in and out there taking whatever they want. He said, I walked over to the police officers who were there and I said, you see these guys taking stuff? And he said, well, there's no one to prosecute them, so there's no reason to arrest them. That's what we're getting to? So if you think about that just from a petty theft standpoint, nobody's locking those people up, but charges should be brought. There should be consequences and accountability. And now you come over to violent crime. He's letting people out of jail that are now recommitting crimes. What's going to happen here? I mean, I am worried for the city of Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia, in my opinion, over the last 5 to 8 years has done a really good job of trying to bring itself to a new level, fixing up the housing issues. Sean's company does all affordable housing. And I worry about all of that. Where's this going to go? Where does this end, Larry? You know, where does it end? What's the goal here? I think the answer to that is votes. Period, end of story. I don't really believe that Larry Krasner cares about Michael White. He certainly doesn't care about Sean Schellenger. He's a narcissistic, crazy person. If you have the opportunity to sit in front of this person, you see it. And we're seeing it in politics in our country today. The power has made him lose what hopefully was his original good intentions or goodwill, trying to do the right thing. Somewhere that was lost along the line, if he ever had it.
So based on your experience, what do you think Larry Krasner's vision of Philadelphia is?
I think he doesn't care about Philadelphia. He thinks he's going to be something bigger than that. This is just a stepping stone for him.
To your knowledge, was this Michael White's first time he was arrested?
No, it wasn't. So thank you for asking me that question. Michael White was arrested in November of 2017. So what is that, 9 months before he killed Sean. He was put into an ARD program. It was theft, instrument of a crime, marijuana possession, and I think there was one other charge. Of course, once he killed Sean and the charges were brought, the ARD goes away. And that trial then, that case then comes back up to be heard. Well, that case still hasn't been heard. That case won't be heard until February of 2020, and I'll tell you why. Larry told me, we don't want to, mix apples and oranges. He's trying to make me believe that there's a strategy here of keep continuing that case. Well, there is a strategy on behalf of Michael White, because if he were found guilty of those charges, that would have an impact on the case of Sean's death and certainly an impact on the sentencing. Literally, the case, well, I will tell you, I went to the preliminary hearing for that case when it then was off ARD. They had 2 witnesses, Penn police officer, and a woman watching the video surveillance. Clearly, he did everything that the cops had said he did.
What were the charges?
The charges, again, were theft, instrument of a crime, possession of marijuana, and I think there was one other one that's escaping me.
Was it just a store theft type thing?
I think he stole a bicycle off the Penn campus. that had GPS on it. But nonetheless, they saw him on video stealing it, so the cops come, he runs, all that kind of business. So he was running away from the cops, and maybe that was the other charge. So I went to the preliminary hearing. He clearly would be found guilty of those. It was really pretty simple. 2 witnesses walk up, they have video, he did it, okay, what are the, I don't know if that's a misdemeanor, whatever that is. I don't know the level of crime. But nonetheless, it mattered because as people tried to create this college student and poet, that is not who he was. And they continued that case and continued it and continued it. And then, what I didn't know was that was up for trial again Tuesday while we were sitting in the courtroom on the murder charge. Anthony Voci, the chief homicide prosecutor, left the room, went to another courtroom to continue that case. I sent him a note after I learned that at the end of the day, and I said, did Judge Bronson know that that case was to be heard? He said, Judge Bronson knew of the case. I said, that's not what I asked you. He gave me no answer. So what they did was they had it continued while we're sitting there on the murder trial to February of 2020. My understanding from criminal lawyers are saying something like that. So those kinds of charges are disposed of really pretty quickly. This is a process that just moves through. It's not like a murder trial. So favors happened in order to get a case from November of 2017 with those types of charges all the way to February of 2020 because judges want to dispose of that stuff. However that turns out. But his sentencing is, well, it was supposed to be December 6th. We know that the February 2020 will have no play, no chance of that. Now I was called yesterday to be told that now the sentencing will be December 19th. So it was explained to me that they wouldn't have enough time to do a pre-sentencing report. And I asked what that was. They said, well, that's where a probation officer interviews Michael, his family, his friends. And I said, oh, it sounds like to me so that we can paint this picture and find him a job and all of these things to tell the judge why he shouldn't go to jail on these charges. Silence by the assistant district attorney. And I said to her, well, then if it's the 19th and I have no choice, it's the 19th. And I said, Sherelle, I hope that someday you can quit this job and stand up and tell the truth. And I thank you for your courage. And I mean that because she's the one person that I will tell you was trying the whole time, and I knew it. She wasn't going to speak out inappropriately. She was incredibly professional. Her mother was in the courtroom when she was doing her closing argument. And her mom just gave me a hug and said, this case means a lot to her. And I said, I know it does, and she's doing the best she can under really bad circumstances.
Linda, you sat in that courtroom and you heard the testimony, and Michael White testified to events that happened that night. So
Yes.
First I want to ask you about your reaction to hearing what he said, because we weren't there. I want to hear if the other witnesses matched what he said.
So that's a very interesting one. So there's eyewitness statements. There's 2 guys that were with Sean that night. So let's discount their testimony, okay? There are other witnesses, I forget how many there were, it was 4 or 5, that were just people walking down the street, good, solid people who sat up in that seat and swore that Michael came out of nowhere. Michael yelled at Sean, who Sean wasn't even looking at Michael at this point, yelled at him, why do you have to be a tough guy? That's when Michael's testimony is the driver from the Uber driver came over to him and said, settle down, there's nothing going on here, right? So all of them were very consistent that Michael was irate. He showed up. Sean turned around to face him when he said, why do you have to be a tough guy? Michael then takes off his backpack. Literally, this is how much time. Remember, this is self-defense, like somebody was beating him up. Not one person, said Sean, ever threw a punch. Ever. Touched him. Didn't even put his fingertip on him. At all. Every eyewitness. Michael opens his backpack, pulls the knife out and says, you want some of this? You don't want some of this. Sean goes and tackles him. Michael stops him. Now, Michael doesn't disagree with that. What Michael added in there, though, that no other eyewitness, not one, and all of them were asked the question, he said Sean made a racial slur. Which, picking the wrong person, by the way. You know, all Sean's character witnesses happened to be black. One of his girlfriends that he dated for a long time, black. It is such a slap in the face to call our family a racist. Far from it. But that's a different story. So Michael said that Sean turned around and said, after he said, why do you have to be a tough guy? Sean said, I'll beat the black off of you. The only person in that whole trial that said that was him and his lawyers repeating it 10,000 times. Every eyewitness that was asked the question if there was a racial slur, no. So Michael's the only one that heard this. Now, he was coached, probably, to add that piece of information in. Let's get everybody focused on a shiny object over here, create turmoil so nobody focuses on the facts. The facts are he killed him. The facts are no one touched him. No one touched him. And my understanding from the video listening in the courtroom was that after he stabbed Sean, they went down to the ground. He got up, he pulled the knife out as if he was going to stab him again, and people were coming screaming, no, no, get out of here. I don't know how this isn't murder. I mean, I just don't know how it's not murder.
Has Michael White or his family ever reached out to you from the day that it happened till now?
No.
Not including public statements?
No.
So you've never heard from Michael White's family?
Never. No remorse, by the way, during the whole trial. There wasn't one tear shed from Michael White. Not one. Not one. He had no remorse. He was rather arrogant when he sat testifying. The sad part for us is he's out walking the street with no help. Everybody that surrounded him met him the day after he killed Sean.
Take me to that day in the courtroom when the bailiff came back and said there's a verdict. Describe what that was like for you.
You know, your body fills with anxiety at that moment. But I knew that was going to be the verdict. I just knew. I knew in my heart of hearts. I was not surprised. Disappointed, but not surprised. The jury had to find intent here. Had they had third-degree murder, I think that that's where they would have ended up. You know, in the closing arguments, his attorney said, you know, this is all about class and race. I was 17 years old when I had Sean, and we were poor. So, you know nothing about us or our family. You don't know that community, inclusion, diversity was part of who we were and who we are today and who we will be tomorrow, no matter what story they made up. Anybody that wants to look into Sean's life, please do it. Anybody that wants to look into my life, please do it. That's exactly what you're going to find. But that's not the story that was being told. And I'll tell you, I even saw a change in the reporters. They walked into that room thinking that Michael White, you know, there was some self-defense here or something. I will tell you that the body language and some of the words started to change. My feeling was they saw what they saw, and they know that it was not appropriate how that all turned out. I felt that way. And that's saying something that I thought the media actually was like, oh my, this isn't what they made us believe. So, you know, I walked out of the courtroom. Obviously, my adrenaline was 1,010.
Let's back up, because you didn't walk out of the courtroom on your own. So let's back up.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I actually did walk out of the courtroom on my own. If you read the newspapers, I was removed. No one touched me at all. No police officers ever laid a hand on me. But for sensationalization, I will tell you that I stood up. I walked right up to the to the bar there that separates you. And I just said, Judge, I have something to say. I would like Larry Krasner to be arrested today for obstruction of justice. He has blood on his hands, just as Michael does. And then I turned around to Michael's family and I said, I hope that you're proud of Michael. Someone on their side yelled, arrest her. And the judge says to me nicely, ma'am, you have to sit down. He let me talk, though. He let me talk. And when someone yelled on the other side, arrest her, I said, you don't have to. I'm leaving on my own. And the police officers lined up, and I walked out. No one removed me. No one needed to remove me. While I was upset, I certainly wasn't doing anything that would be called bad behavior except putting one foot in front of the other.
When you got out to the street, you gave a pretty lengthy interview. It looked like there was a lot of microphones in your face. I think it was about 14 minutes. I want to ask you first, have you watched that?
I don't know if I've actually watched the whole thing. I was intense, and I stand by every single word I said. I don't have any moment of wishing I would have said something differently. I said what was on my mind, and I spoke the truth, and the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And if Larry did the same thing, we wouldn't be sitting here.
During that statement, you mentioned U.S. Attorney Bill McSwain and federal prosecutors. So were they involved in this at all?
2 federal prosecutors actually showed up to the closing arguments, which was kind of interesting to me. I mean, I know that people have eyes on Larry Krasner because of some of the things I'm sitting here talking about. People are concerned about the city. People are concerned about the people in the city of Philadelphia, their safety, and the treatment of victims. I think that it was interesting because Anthony Voci, the chief prosecutor, or chief homicide prosecutor, seemed nervous and taken aback that they would show up in the courtroom. I don't know what all that drama is between lawyers. But what I do know is they saw what they saw. And hopefully there's going to be an investigation into not just Sean's case, but cases where the charges have continually dropped, whether it started at murder 1 or murder 3, and they ended up somewhere way less than that. How did we get to that? I know he has discretion, but he does not have the right to suppress evidence or not allow evidence to even be admitted for discussion. He does not have the right to do that.
When you say investigation, are you talking about the U.S. Attorney Bill McSwain?
I hope so. I don't know the answer to that, but I hope so.
During your statement, you said McSwain should prosecute Krasner.
He should prosecute him.
If you had an opportunity now to sit down with Larry Krasner, is there anything else that you would want to say to him?
No. I have no words for him. He's not worthy of my words or any other mother in this city that has suffered at his hand. And I mean that. People are victimized twice here. It's a crazy, bizarre situation.
Do you think that the media coverage has been fair to you and your son? Can you talk about that?
You know, I think, so I'm going to say no, it hasn't, but it doesn't sell newspapers. So for instance, I won't say the station, but they wanted to do an interview with me. And I said no. And they said, why? And I said, because of your coverage. It has not been fair and balanced. And they said, well, that would be really horrible for our reputation. And I said, well, I can't help that. I'll give you an example. Your reporter said, Michael White said that Sean said, I will smack the black off of you. I said, and that's where the sentence ended. It didn't say, there was not one eyewitness that corroborated that statement. I said, so you were missing the whole other half of the story. That doesn't sound like balanced reporting to me. I just was asking for fair reporting of all the issues. That did not happen.
So what has happened since that day? Have people approached your family? Has the public tried to communicate with you? Tell us what's been going on.
Yeah, so we spend a first couple hours of every morning wiping down our Facebook pages from all the kinds of things that people put on there, calling us a racist, being hateful. My son and his girlfriend, who live in the city, stayed with me for the first 3 days because they didn't want to go back home, and I didn't think they should go back home. Because unfortunately, I'm not saying that this was Michael White's friends or family. What I am saying is that Larry and the defense team created racial tensions that did not even exist to stir this pot, and they did. And unfortunately, you end up with fringe on both sides of that, white and black, that now all of us are in an unsafe situation. What was he hoping to do? I mean, do you want riots to happen in this city? That's crazy. Who does that? And why?
What advice would you give someone if a mom or a family member came to you today and said, my daughter, my son was the victim of a crime? What advice would you give that person? Well,
if there's a way to get a federal prosecutor or a special prosecutor on it, that would be my first one. Larry Krasner has to be off of it. I don't know if that would be my advice. I don't know if it can actually really happen within our legal system. Look, our legal system was built upon trust in some ways. So a prosecutor has a ton of discretion, I've now learned. And I don't know that you can try to legislate that they don't, but you usually have a trustworthy person sitting in that seat. So we're in this weird space of a person who is not literally prosecuting people to the fullest extent of the law and playing his part in that justice system. It's a person issue versus a system issue, I think. He's a bad person.
What do you think went wrong with this process? We're in a country with a constitution and laws and a legislature, so our process isn't designed to have people sitting here feeling like you feel. So what went wrong?
We have a rogue prosecutor, period, end of story. It's a public defender dressed as a prosecutor. He has no intention of being the voice of the victim. And in this case, the prosecutor represents the victim. The victim's family is not actually a party to the case. So you have no representation and no right to any representation. You have no voice in that courtroom at all, unless you have a prosecutor doing their job.
So what would make the process better?
Number one, that Larry is not reelected and he's removed from that office. And number two, that he's put in jail for what he's done. I literally believe that the man has committed crimes by way of suppressing evidence to get his way. He has played a game with the system to get what he wants.
What's next for you?
You know, I don't know yet. I feel as though I owe it to the other moms in this city, to the police in this city, to speak up and try to be as loud as I possibly can, to try to bring people together that, whether it's police, whether it's victims and their families, to pull those voices together so that they can be heard. Larry would like everyone to be fractured and divided, because the power of those numbers coming together will put him sitting on the curb.